não para.
Hello, I'm Alan Lewis, Vice President of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs for Take-Two Interactive. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to Virtual E3 2021. Take-Two, like many organizations, is deeply committed to and actively involved in numerous initiatives to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion within our society and industry. Affecting meaningful, sustainable change is a continuous process, and there is no one solution that can achieve that goal.
Nossa, é assim que vai ser Take-Two?
To enact change, especially for those underserved and
live assim?
underrepresented communities, there needs to be a continuum of activism and engagement with educational programs serving as its core foundation. Beginning with children in elementary school, we have the ability to light a spark of creativity, intellectual curiosity, and wonder that can last a lifetime. Continuing through middle and high school, we can support and nurture students during their formative years and increase the depth of their skills that can provide a pathway to attending one of 400 plus colleges and universities within the United States that offer degrees in game design. Providing opportunities to attend these academic institutions, including need-based financial support, is also a critical component to helping end generational cycles of inequality. And while pursuing their creative and technical degrees, students can learn firsthand from industry leaders that share their experience, acumen, and passion through one-on-one mentoring and internships at our organization. Together, if our industry can execute this continuum, we will have invested meaningfully in the lives of the youth from these communities for more than a decade before they begin their professional journey. Diversity and inclusion make us a better industry for today and, most importantly, for tomorrow. It allows us to make better entertainment experiences that are authentic, culturally relevant, and reflective of the audiences that enjoy them. Today, we have brought together a few of our important partners who will share their organization's mission and role in this endeavor, as well as their insights on how we as an industry can continue to take these important steps together for the future. We hope that you find their work as inspiring as we do. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to my colleague, Tony Lagans, Director of Diversity and Inclusion for 2K, who will be the moderator for today's discussion.
Thanks, Alan. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce my esteemed panelists today. We're going to start off with Jim Huntley. Jim Huntley is currently the professor and head of marketing at USC. Jim is a faculty advisor, and he's an executive producer for USC Games Expo and a co-founding partner of PAC-U Gaming. Next, we have Susanna Pollock. Susanna is the president of Games for Change, which is a nonprofit that empowers game creators and social innovators to drive real-world impact through games and immersive media. Next to Susanna, we have Gordon Bellamy. Gordon is a professor of practice of cinematographic arts at USC. He is also the head of USC Bridge Incubator, which is a program that helps to cultivate the next generation of leaders in the video game industry. And last, next to Gordon, we have Leila Shabir.
Pelo que eu entendi, vai ser
Leila
cada
is the
um
founder of Girls Make Games,
da
which
empresa
offers a series
que é
of summer
parceira com a
camps,
Take-Two.
workshops, and game jams designed to inspire the next generation of designers, creators, and engineers. Welcome to all of you, great panelists, and thank you so much for joining our important discussion today. Now, I'd like to dive right in here, and Jim, I'm going to start with you. In Alan's opening, he mentioned something that was so important, and it was really just talking about the increasing role that diversity, equity, and inclusion it is playing in the video game industry today. So before we get into the big concepts that we're talking about here, let's just break some things down for our viewers. Jim, can you help us understand and talk about equity and diversity and why it's so important in the conversation about the video game industry today?
Absolutely. Equity and diversity has been a challenge for the gaming industry since its inception. It hasn't really changed very, very much over time. But I think the biggest change that people are seeing in the last 2 to 3 years are the lack of it in the modern era and the rationale that there's no excuse behind not having better equity and diversity in the industry from here on out. So what I like about working with companies like Take-Two and some other companies that reached out to me about an initiative we started called the Gerald A. Lawson Endowment Fund is that companies are now looking to invest in getting more diversity in their ranks and getting more stories told from different points of view.
I appreciate that. That's a great conversation there. So let's talk about just kind of the inequities and why is it so important to have these conversations. Let's talk about that whole aspect and just getting people in the right mindset to understand what's available for them as majors in this industry. Jim, just talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So a lot of what we've been focusing on from a USC Games perspective is making sure that students of color, Black and Indigenous students in particular, because they have the least amount of representation within our industry out of all the various demographic groups. We've been focusing on scholarships, but the challenge that we have, and I think the challenge that society and the industry has, is it starts earlier than that. There's a phrase from, I can't remember who attribute it to, but there's a phrase that he used that I remember saying, the inequities of our past pay dividends into the future. And that sticks with me because the reality is if you don't have a great opportunity or access to computer science labs and specialized education in grade school and high school and junior high school, the odds of you having a great portfolio piece when it comes time to apply to a program like ours puts you at a deficit. And if that deficit keeps rolling on into the future, generation after generation, the gap between the ability to get into some of these slots in game design and not being able to get them gets wider and wider. So we need to do a better job as a society, and we are willing to do our part and help work with companies like Take-Two to lead the vanguard on how do we get students some opportunity from grade school? Like, how do we make sure they can see this as an option? Because when I, as a Black man, get in front of a small group of grade school students, and I say I work in the video game industry, you can see the eyes just their minds explode because they've never seen anyone like me in the videos they see on YouTube or other visitors to their classes, to their seminars. So it's important to show that we have presence here, but it's also important to make sure that the students who look like us, who are 20 years, 30 years, 40 years behind us, also have the opportunities that we didn't in some cases to get a job in this industry.
Yes, thank you so much for your insights. So important there. Susanna, that really kind of speaks to a lot of the great work that you're doing in helping to reach this underserved community. Can you talk about the work that Games for Change is doing?
Sure. So, our mission, as you said earlier, is to empower game designers and social innovators, right? To use games for social change. And we see our work with younger people as really inspiring the next generation, right? And so just what Jim was saying, like we're going as young as 6th grade, sometimes 5th grade, but trying to...
Cara, basicamente estão falando de inclusões sociais no mundo dos games. E o que eles querem dizer com isso? Eles querem dizer que vão incluir mais negros no mundo nas empresas deles, mais não vou dizer gays, como não é gays que fala? Tem uma palavra. Mas vocês entenderam. Vão colocar mais mulheres no mundo dos games, no mundo das empresas deles.
How to make games, but we also combine that with civic engagement. So they have to think about how games can
E tudo isso, galera, não é que eles vão, tipo, tirar os brancos e colocar mais pessoas assim, não. Eles vão abrir mais vagas.
They're learning important 21st century and STEM skills that can help them regardless of what career path. But what we really hope to see happen is that they see a future for themselves and they see an opportunity, a pathway for them. And part of our program, an important part of it, is this idea of mentoring and mentoring from near peers and also from people from the community. So as Jim said, it's so important they see themselves in the people that are coming to speak to them. So when we're in Los Angeles, for example, we can reach out to USC Games for game design students to come and speak to the kids, that we can bring people in from Riot or Activision or from Take-Two to come in and say, yes, this is what I do, and this is something for you. And we do the same thing in New York.
Bom, galera, acho que a conferência da Take-Two vai ser assim, só nos papos. Eu acho que eu não vou transmitir ela toda, não. Vou só um pedaço pra vocês aí.
Use this program as like their college essay, or they're building their portfolio. And I love the idea that, you know, we can get to them at a young age. They can spend their summers with Layla at Girls Make Games, and then they can go on and apply to college, you know. And we were talking about this pipeline or you know, this pathway for them. And so that's that role and what we hope to inspire.
I love what you said there, Suzanne. There's so many little nuggets that you just pulled out there. The different avenues you can have and career pathways there are in the gaming industry. Just the activity that you can have in terms of having mentorship and role models and representation, and just, you know, having good gamers out there. So there's so many things that you talked about that I want to hit on. Let's just pull Layla into this conversation and just talk about the idea of mentorship and representation. Layla, talk about the workshops
Galera,
and
daqui a
the
pouco
summer
vamos ter
programs
PC
that you
Games.
offer to girls. How does that help to increase the representation and the mentorship aspects that we've talked about?
Thanks so much for having me. I was on mute. This is 2021, still going on mute. But like Susanna said, I think it's really important to
Galera, eu
pass
acho
that baton on.
que isso que eles estão dizendo aí,
Summer after
essa
summer,
inclusão
having
social aí,
created a place that's, you know, for girls. We get this
que eles
question
estão
a
querendo
lot, why do you
fazer.
need a space that's just for girls? There's so
Eu
many
acho que
programs
era um
out there that are open to
assunto
everyone.
bacana, um assunto legal, da hora
That space
de se
because,
passar
like Jim talked about, it's so
pra
important to
turma
see
aí,
people
mas
who
acho que
are
não
like
é um
yourselves.
assunto
For many of the girls
pra
that come
E3,
to
né,
camp,
galera?
this is their first time walking into a room full of girls who love video games. You know, they've been so accustomed to kind of being the only girl on their robotics team, or the only girl that went to a coding camp with their brother, and the girl who's fighting her brothers for you know the Xbox controller. So those are very common themes and stories, and I think it's important to kind of tie in not just the mentorship, but also the community. It's very important to walk into a room and feel like you're not an outsider, and the best way to do that is to show many more faces that look just like you. It's really validating to walk away not just with the technical skills, but to feel like these are people that I'm gonna, you know, kind of encounter in 10-15 years, and we'll be like professionals, because right now we're just kids making games, but we'll be professionals in a few years. And 7 years out for Girls Make Games, we're finally starting to see, you know, these girls kind of make plans together to go to college, and this year, I would say, like, the first time we got in, like, dozens of emails from families saying, you know, my daughter is now thinking of college, and how do we get this portfolio going? How do we set that up? So I think touching on Jim's point too, there's so many challenges that, you know, people have to go through just to get everything right. You shouldn't have to rely on luck so much. So if you look at the women who are now excelling and thriving in the industry, and you ask them their stories, so many things had to go right in their lives to finally end up in the industry. Many of them ended up there accidentally, like me and even Tony. I think Tony and I touched on that earlier. But it shouldn't have to be luck or accident. We can actually intentionally create these pipelines. And I think it requires all of us working together, like everyone in this room, talking about what we're doing and how do we pass our students on from, you know, we start as young as 8, getting them onto the programs and then passing them on to the student challenge and then on to USC and then finally on to the industry. I think that's basically the magic formula to solving the problem that we're talking about today.
Yes, thank you for hitting on that pipeline challenge and actually solution. You really clearly laid it out there for us. I really, really enjoy that. And something else you mentioned is just like really opening this world of gaming to new, diverse pool and a spectrum of gamers. And how do we create those real pathways back into the gaming industry? Gordon, you've done a lot of work in just helping to create value where value was not seen in places in the gaming industry, specifically for the gay gaming professionals. Can you talk about how the representation and widening the spectrum of what gaming professional looks like and how your company and your role really accomplishes that?
Sure. So we have a mission which is focused on education, employment, expertise, and entrepreneurship. And the reason why is because alongside diversity and equity inclusion, there's a new word that's come up a lot, which is belonging. right? A feeling of belonging, of being default. And I know that people in their uniqueness do a lot of mental, socioeconomic, and sometimes social gymnastics before they get to be as good as they are, before they get a chance to participate in this panel or participate in our industry by and large. And I think the work that we all share is trying to disrupt some of those mental gymnastics, socioeconomic gymnastics, social gymnastics that young women, people of color, indigenous people, neurodiverse people need to do in order to be as great as they are, to belong, in the space. And sort of hearing, what Layla's speaking to of a cohort, right, that treats each other as default, and where are we going to go now together, collectively? The program, Jim's putting in place, right, with the endowment honoring Lawson, where there's going to be cohorts of Black and Indigenous people, right, growing together. And the work that Susanna, you've been doing since before it was cool, okay? You've been changing games, making that $1.15 before all of us. All of that work, and with the support of corporations like Take-Two, right, is enabling us to move a generation forward. Specifically with GGP, we have a scholar.
Basicamente é isso, galera.